Hello. Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Enzian. My name is Paige. I am the development coordinator here at the theater. I just want to say thank you for coming out and joining us for Akira. This screening of Akira is part of our Science on Screen program, which is made possible through the Coolidge Corner Theater through funding from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. So the purpose of Science on Screen is to help us bridge the gap between science and art by pairing a film screening with a knowledgeable speaker who's going to talk a little bit about some of the scientific aspects you're going to see in the film today. Today's speaker I am very excited for. We are being joined over Zoom by John G. Kruth, who is the executive director of the Rhine Research Center, as well as the founder and education director of the Rhine Education Center. He has many years of experience researching and discussing scientific parapsychology. So today he's going to give us a little glimpse into that world before the film and give you some context for some of the cool stuff that you're going to see. At the end of Mr. Kruth's presentation, we are going to have time for a couple of questions because we have an interesting audio set up in the theater. What we're going to do is if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand and we will bring you a mic. And then I'm going to repeat your question into the microphone so that Mr. Kruth can hear you. So take pity on me, be nice to me, give me about a sentence or two, but I know that we're all going to be really excited to share in our knowledge and what we've learned. So definitely think about it, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So without further ado, thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to pass the mic, so to speak, to Mr. Kruth. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. And I'm assuming I'm on the screen here, and you guys can hear me. So let me just begin.
We can hear you loud and clear, but we are going to work on putting you on the screen. Give it half a second. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Just let me know when you're ready.
Already. All right. We are good to go.
Okay. Well, first of all, Paige, thank you for inviting me to come here. And I have to tell everyone who's here, you're in for a treat. Not only because this is a fun and interesting film, but because the visuals are amazing. So I hope you had your morning visual enhancement, whatever you might do, because this is really going to be a fun experience. I wish I could be in the theater with you to do this. Now you might wonder, why am I here to speak about topics related to films, something about this film? Well, I'm the executive director of the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm a parapsychologist. A lot of people wonder, what does that mean to be a parapsychologist? I'm not someone who goes out and chases ghosts like you might see on TV. The Rhine is a research center that has been studying parapsychological topics since the 1930s. It's the oldest operating parapsychology lab in the country. In fact, you might have seen the cards, of course, and then the famous wavy lines. These were invented at the research center. Actually, it was the Duke Parapsychology Lab at that time, back in the 1930s, and it was used for ESP tests for many years. But that's ESP. We're talking about mind matter or mind-to-mind communication. But what we're here to talk about today is actually mind-matter interaction. I'll use different terms for this. You'll hear popular terms like telekinesis, but the terms we tend to use are psychokinesis, PK, or mind-matter interaction. So you'll hear me use each of these interchangeably. It's all the same thing. It's being able to affect objects from a distance. Is this real? Can people really do this? So that's one of the things I'm going to talk about today is it real? Another thing I want to talk a little bit about is, can people actually learn to do this and develop these skills? And a third thing is, hey, is the government testing this stuff? What are they doing with it? So let me start off with the first thing. Is it real? Is this a real phenomenon? You might have seen different examples of this where there was a film that came out a number of years ago called Michael, where John Travolta was able to do things like spin spoons with his mind or cause things to move around. You may have seen Stranger Things. And the question is, well, can people crush Coke cans with their mind or have some sort of effect on them? or if you've seen Carrie, can knives be thrown across the room? I can't say that those things aren't real, but what I can say is that we've never seen evidence to support the level of PK or mind matter interaction in the laboratory. But we have seen some pretty unusual things. PK we talk about in different forms, and one of them is what we call macro PK, where you can actually see objects that are moving. And another is micro PK. You can see these are some spoons that I have here that came from spoon bending parties we have at the Rhine. And they are an example of something between macro and micro PK. Macro PK is when you move large objects. So things that I was describing with Stranger Things or with Carrie, these are what we would consider macro PK, where you can actually see what's going on and see things moving, see the effects. Micro PK to do with affecting smaller objects that aren't visible, but sometimes see it if you test statistics, or maybe even affecting electronics. But let's start with macro PK, because that's what you're going to see a lot of in this movie. Macro PK is something that, that we've tested in a lab with smaller.
Okay, we're back. Thank you for your patience. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Mr. Kruth, and everything's going to be great this time. So I'm excited. Enjoy.
So, well, glad to be back again. I'm not gonna. I don't remember. I don't know where we left off or where you guys cut out here. But I'll tell you what. I'm going to hit the high points for you, because one of the things that I test is not just this macro PK. Can people move things that you can actually see? But actually, we've done experiments also with what we call micro PK. And one of my pet projects is related to people having influence on machines, maybe like what we just saw a minute ago. Can people actually have an effect on computer systems, on networks? And do these effects cause disruptions? And so we've run some studies and found that in working computer networks that you might use in your normal office or in a theater, for example, that when people start to get very emotional and excited, it can start to interrupt the system. And we'll start to see networks that'll start to break up. And we've done this in really controlled conditions, very careful situations where we wanted to make sure that there wasn't any normal influence. And we've done it with control groups and things because we're doing formal research. We publish in peer-reviewed journals, and we have to present these at conferences in scientific forums. So we're very careful about what we present, and it happens. It's not a question of is it real. It happens under controlled conditions. If it happens, what does that mean? Well, it means that there's something that we're looking at that is not physical in nature, or if it is physical in nature, it's not something that we're able to measure using our current measurement tools of science. This is a really interesting phenomena. I mean, how does it work? This is where we're at now. We're trying to understand more about how it works. And the reason we're trying to understand that is because we want to know, can people learn to do this? Can we train people? We have some people who have spent a lot of years trying to develop their skills to do this, and they're able to produce these effects, maybe not consistently 100%, but enough that we're able to say this is a real effect. And why are these people different than other people? As I mentioned before, when people get emotional, maybe anxious or have strong emotions around electronics, it'll go wonky. And we oftentimes recommend, hey, this whole idea of, just take a break and get away from your computer for a while. Yeah, that's real. Sometimes if you take a break, walk away, go for a walk, have a cup of coffee, whatever it is, and then come on back, things will start working again. And most people will say, well, that's because, I was making mistakes because I was worked up on things. But what we found is it could be that, but we've also found that people are having a direct influence on the electronics. This is a theme that you'll see presented within the film quite a bit. People can have these effects, and they can, when we start to understand the physiology of the emotions a bit more, we can start to look at ways to train people and help them develop these skills in more strongly than what we currently see in the lab. Like I said, it's not consistent. We don't see people levitating cars or, causing Coke cans to crush, but we see this activity happen often. Now to the juicy part, right? What does the government have to do with all this stuff? Has the government tested these sorts of things? Well, let me say first, I don't have any special government clearances. I don't have secret information. And just by me saying that I don't have this, I've had people say, oh, well, you must be part of the conspiracy then, because I won't tell them about the secrets. But I don't have any secrets. There's no records that I have at the Rhine of the government being involved in any secret programs. But the programs are not all secret. Back in the 1970s, 50 years ago, there was a program that started in the U.S. government to study people who were being developed as psychic spies. They were using a technique called remote viewing, where they're able to see things from a distance. And I know these people. I know a number of people who were part of this program, some of the psychics, some of the researchers, and some of the people who were in the government and the intelligence agencies that were running these programs. What they were doing is they had people sitting in Maryland in a little house that no one knew about, but now they can disclose where it was. But they were sitting in this little house and trying to see when, for example, back in the 1970s, there was a Russian plane that went down in the Amazon and no one knew where it was. They were searching for it because it had high technology on it that the government wanted to get to. The Russians were searching for it. People in South America were searching for it, and the U.S. government were searching for it. The satellites weren't helping. So they tasked the psychic spies, the remote viewers, to see if they could get information about the plane. And they pinpointed the spot within about an area of about 5 miles. In the entire Amazon, they were able to say it's within 5 miles of this spot. And they sent government people down there to search for it, and they found it. They found people walking out of the jungle with pieces of the plane and found the plane. So this is just one example. They've also used it to locate people who had been kidnapped, or oftentimes to find out what's inside of sealed buildings that might be in the Soviet Union. These are people sitting in Maryland who are able to see this from a distance. Remote viewing is something that was not only used by the government, but the protocol it became public in 1995. And there was a episode of Nightline where they discussed remote viewing openly because it was declassified at that point in time. Additional information has come to light since then, and people are now learning these techniques and practicing it on their own. They're using it to predict the stock market, to predict horse races, and many other things, baseball games. There's a big organization in Las Vegas, as you might imagine, where they're using remote viewing to try to make money. And some people are doing really well with it. Again, it's not 100%. You don't get 100% accuracy in most things in life, and it's the same thing with this. But people have been developing these skills, and the government was testing it. But why was the government testing this and using it for their advantage? Well, you can imagine if you have psychic spies, that gives you a huge advantage over any sort of international situation, or if you're trying to determine if there's nuclear weapons in a certain location. You can use these people to help find that out. What made them start? Well, what made them start was actually this book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, which came out in 1969. The Iron Curtain was what separated the Soviet Union from the rest of the Western world. It was a wall of obscurity. You could not get information about what was happening in the Soviet Union unless you were in the Soviet Union at that time. Well, there were two parapsychologists who were in the Soviet Union for a number of years and learned about the work they were doing and brought it back to the States and published this book. When the government saw it, the US government saw it, the intelligence agency said, we need to catch up. Well, what were they doing? They were trying to test mind-matter interaction, psychokinesis. Not only trying to determine, can people move little things that are in sealed containers like we do now? They did test that, and they did find people, and specifically this one woman named Nina Kulagina, who was able to do this and was able to have an effect on objects that were, some of them metal, and then people said, well, maybe it's magnets. So they used matches. They used many different materials to make sure that she wasn't using some sort of trickery. What they found is when she did it, her physiology would get very, very activated. She'd start sweating, her heart rate would go up, her blood pressure was going up. It would be a big strain on her. But she was able to do it consistently. And if you look out on the web, you can find videos of Russian mind-matter interaction, Russian telekinesis, psychokinesis. You'll find videos of her doing this. That wasn't all they were doing. They were also trying to see if they could train people to be able to have an effect on other people. There was this idea of trying to see if they could evoke a heart attack in someone from a distance. They were also trying to make people uncomfortable. So when someone came to a meeting, a high-end meeting, and they were in negotiations, if you could make that person very uncomfortable, excite their physiology, make them nervous or anxious, you could affect the results of that meeting. So the Russians at that point were considered, and I don't have anything against the Russians. I have friends who are in Russia right now, and they are still doing some of this. But at that time, they were using it as a form of espionage. These themes relate exactly to some of the things you're going to see today. I really wish I could be there with you, because I'm telling you, the visuals are amazing, and I'd love to see them on the big screen with you today. But I can speak about this all day, but I'm going to give you a chance, if you have any questions, to ask questions now.
Hi. So I read a lot of Richard Matheson growing up, and I was wondering, because he worked a lot with like the parapsychology and parakinetics in like the 60s and 70s, and if you thought his works, maybe like Vanilla Sky or Stir of Echoes, had any of a positive or negative impact on the field of parapsychology, because it was so mainstream.
So just to reiterate, they were asking about Richard Madsen and whether or not you think that kind of work and his novels had any positive or negative impact on the industry and when he worked with parapsychologists.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Richard Matson, so I don't know which. Can you tell me what context we're talking about here? Okay, so if I'm understanding, I am familiar with some of the projects you're talking about, and some of them, for example, Hell House is something that deals with apparitions, hauntings, types of poltergeist things. A lot of that has been overblown on the TV and what you might see on normal ghost hunting type of episodes. That's not the type of thing we do. We do go to, I have done poltergeist investigations, and I have gone to haunted places that are considered to be haunted, but we look at it from a very scientific perspective. We do not go to the conclusion that there are spirits that are causing these things unless we can rule everything else out. But some other things you were talking about, like I Am Legend and some of the other more commercial or even Hollywood representations of parapsychology, they give people expectations. And as I was saying before, I can't say it doesn't happen, but it's not what we find in the laboratory. We haven't seen examples of that. So when people get these expectations, these large expectations of what they should see, and we see very small effects. The small effects are really impressive because they demonstrate that there's something that we don't understand scientifically, and we can't ignore it. Because if we ignore it, we're not really getting the full picture of the sciences. And so this is whether it helped or not, it tends to get people interested, but until people actually start to look at the work we're doing, and they don't really understand the effects that we're seeing. That's why I wanted to speak to you a little bit today.
All right, we have time for one more question. We do that. I lost Sarah with my mic. There she goes.
I was wondering if you could describe the last experiment you did and some of the variables that you control in that experiment.
I'm assuming the experiment you might be discussing is the electronic effect, having effects on computers. So let me just talk about that really quickly. I have 20 years of technology experience that I did before I started working in the field of parapsychology. So what I did is I built a computer network. And most computer networks, they have automatic error correction in them. I interrupted that. I took that computer network and I interrupted all the error catching, and I did it myself. Instead of auto-correcting, I recorded all the errors on the network. And I had that running constantly in a room. I had people come into that room. They didn't even know this computer network was there. I had them come into the room, and I asked them to do some tasks on the computer. It was just silly stuff, like computer game type of things, like guess where the card is out of a deck of cards, move the ball from one side of the screen to the other one, type in certain things. And for half the people that were there, they went through the process, and I was registering to see if there were more errors in the network that was in the room when they were doing the task than when they weren't. But half the people who were in the room, I screwed up the software for them. They'd start typing, and I'd type the wrong letters. And there were times, so they had to go very quickly. They would move the mouse, and it would bounce back. It wouldn't go where the card they were looking for would always be the last card. I was essentially trying to make them anxious. And what I found is that people who were reporting being more anxious, during that time that they reported being anxious, I saw more errors on the network that they weren't even aware was in the room. So the fact that they were being anxious, the anxiety that they were evoking, seemed to have an effect on the electronics that were in the room. My next step beyond this, and something I'm going to be starting sometime in the next year, I hope, is to measure their physiology and see what type of physiological activity is going on when these errors occur. This is something we call unconscious PK. It's when someone is not doing it purposely, but it's when someone is doing it's having an effect from their unconscious mind. This is why we might have had a little bit of an interruption in our network earlier today. It may have been a little bit of anxiety or unconscious type of activity that might have had an effect on that. I hope that helps to explain it. If you want to know more, if you go to the website at rhine.org and you go to research, you can see the different sorts of research projects that we do.
You guys so much, and thank you, Mr. Kruth, for joining us. Like he said, if you guys are interested in more, definitely check out the Rhine Research Center. They are at Rhine, RHINE.org, and also rhineedu.org. So lots of online resources and courses you guys can take if you want to learn more, which I think we all do, honestly. So thank you so much, Mr. Kruth. We're really excited, and I hope everyone enjoys the film. Thank you.
Yes, enjoy the film. I hope you guys have a great time. Thank you for inviting me, Paige.